Should you allow these people to put that billboard up in the first place?
I guess what I'm asking is, if you say they should, and you might not say that, but if you say they should, and then the pressure sees it taken down.
Oh, yeah. Should you take it down?
Yeah. But do you think they should have the right?
No. I don't think you should be promoting information like that, which is so obviously categorically against the interests of public health. Like, it's just no. Like, liberalism says, you can do whatever you want as long as you're not harming anybody else. And saying that vaccines are going to harm your kids is actively harming your kids, because if you don't vaccinate them because you're worried that they're going to get, what did that defunct professor say? He argued that you were going to get Down syndrome if you vaccinate your kids. Autism, that was it, yeah.
Okay, but what if you simply wrote about it and didn't put it on a billboard?
Should you be allowed to write about it?
Yeah, I mean, where do you draw that line?
Well, I mean, you can write about it in your personal life in the way you can write about anything, but you can't put it in a public forum and expect that to be given genuine credibility. Like, you shouldn't be able to put it in newspapers. That's just ridiculous.
There's a difference. Okay, I'm just trying to nail that down. There's a difference between being given credibility and not being able to do it, of course. And you're saying they shouldn't be able to do it.
I don't think they should be able to do it in public-facing news forums, which, yes,
okay,
basically.
All right. David, what's your view?
Look, I think it was the right outcome, but possibly the wrong process. My preference would have been for the complaints to be considered by the Advertising Standards Authority. They have very good codes of practice about what's responsible, and for them to make a decision on it rather than the billboard owner sort of feeling the heat and taking it down. But having said that, people should be able to debate vaccinations, but a billboard isn't a great way to debate it. It is scaremongering, basically. You can't respond to a billboard, you can't critique it, etc. People just drive past it and see it. So, as I say, I think the outcome was fine, but my preference in terms of process wouldn't have been that the owner felt the pressure. It's that we have a really good self-regulatory system, let that do its job.
Do you really think we should be encouraging to debate for anti-vaccinations?
They're nutters and they're wrong, but all my experience is the more you try to say you can't hear this, censor this, is it actually makes them stronger, and then they think it's a conspiracy against them. And actually, I'll just go back to my early thing about slow burn. One of the fascinating episodes is how post-Watergate, people started believing conspiracy theories so much more. Watergate is why we now have everyone believing conspiracy theories around fluoride, around vaccinations, etc. It's all a global thing. So the worst thing you can sometimes do is not allow them to say this is what you believe. How you respond to it is you debunk it, you show they're wrong. It's pretty easy to ridicule it. Now on a billboard you can't do that, so that's why I think the outcome there's fine. But if people want to blog on it, put their views on the internet, etc., write letters to the editor,
they should be allowed.
Yeah.
Too important to have a debate about. You see, this is a very interesting area in itself, which we don't have time to talk about because the second hand's moving towards 1 minute to 5. But again, that's a question of where you draw that line with things that are supposedly too important to have debates about. I'll just leave that hanging in the air.
Yeah, I can feel like another 2-hour conversation coming out about it.
Well, that'd be a very quick one in the 20 seconds we have got left.
We'll speak quickly.
Verity Johnson, nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the panel. David Farrer, thank you for coming on today too.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to us, and we are back tomorrow, and Checkpoints, as usual, follows. Thanks, everybody.
No mai, haere mai, o te hōtaka, o te ahiahi. This is Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. Thanks for joining us. On tonight's program, calls for the President of New Zealand Football to resign after a damning report on bullying, harassment and a boys' club culture. One person has died in Christchurch from taking a bad batch of synthetic drugs. We'll have the latest as others still recover in hospital. Also the latest from Indonesia, where thousands in Quaket towns on Sulawesi are in dire need of food, water and shelter. This is after aftershocks continue. A last resort boarding house for Auckland's homeless has been sold, but some tenants aren't going anywhere. We'll have more on the government's R&D tax credit announcement. And a Canadian scientist puts another big crack in science's glass ceiling with her Nobel Prize win. All coming up on Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. An investigation has found Football New Zealand needs to apologise to 12 women's players who complained about the national coach and offer counselling. The review found that some of coach Andreas Haraf's behaviour had crossed the line into bullying and harassment. Clay Wilson reports.
The review by employment lawyer Philippa Muir was ordered in June after complaints surfaced from the football ferns. It found that 12 players would not play for the team again, while Mr Haraf remained coach. Ms Muir says coaches need to set high standards, but some of the behaviour constituted bullying and harassment. She found that New Zealand football needs to shoulder some blame by not helping Mr Haraf when he got the job, or taking the woman's complaints seriously at first. The review made 22 recommendations to improve the game's top management. It says football authorities need to meet the players to apologise and offer counselling. This is Clay Wilson.
A woman was sent to the cells this afternoon and charged with being in contempt of court after jurors said she approached them and told them of her views on the case. She had been in the public gallery at the High Court in Auckland, where junior rugby coach and teacher aide Olosio Taimo is on trial. Justice Moore said jurors gave him a note saying the woman had approached some of them to say she believed what Mr Taimo was saying, and that meant the culprit is still out there. The woman is also reported to have said she realised she could get them and her into trouble by talking to them. Mr Taimo faces 106 charges of sexually abusing children and is giving evidence in his own defence. Justice Moore said the woman's actions strike at the heart of the justice system, and what she had done was stupid and irresponsible. He encouraged jurors to put the comments out of their mind and concentrate on the evidence. The woman has now been brought back up from the cells. St John Ambulance says its staff in Christchurch are increasingly dealing with physical and verbal attacks from patients on synthetic drugs. Over the last 2 weeks, 19 people in Canterbury have been hospitalised and one person has died due to what has been described by police as a bad batch of synthetic drugs. St John's manager Craig Downing says staff are dealing with patients on synthetic drugs who are unpredictable, difficult to manage and abusive.
Sometimes the treatment regimes that we have to do with these people is to sedate them for their own safety and the staff safety. And what we're finding is that these patients are really aggressive and really challenging to manage. It's a very difficult situation because we don't know what's in this chemical.
Craig Downing says if staff are concerned about their safety, they will wait for the police, and that inevitably delays treatment. Some tenants of a notorious boarding house in Auckland are refusing to leave. The former St Joseph's Catholic convent on Great North Road in the Auckland suburb of Grey Lynn is being closed down. In June, the building sold for $4.1 million to make way for tourist accommodation. Yesterday, the 30 or more tenants were supposed to have gone, but many will be left homeless. A tenant of 3 years, known as Fox, says he had just accepted the place as his home when he was handed an eviction notice. He still hadn't packed his room today because he has nowhere to move to. Both government and non-government social services are in touch with tenants to find them alternative housing. Teachers say they're looking for more than just a higher pay rise from the government. Members of the Primary and Secondary Teachers Union have both rejected pay offers that would increase most teachers' salaries by 9.3% over 3 years. Teachers have told RNZ News they want a bigger pay rise than that. But Southland secondary teacher Nick Gartell says there is no single improvement that will make the government's deal acceptable.
I don't think you can say that a teacher would say, oh, 9-10% will get us over the line, we'd be happy. We want to bring pay up to parity with other professions that are a similar sort of wage. So I don't think a number per teacher is the answer. It is a combination of things. It is workload, it is acknowledgement that we do a good job.
Teacher Nick Gartell, the Education Ministry says it's already working with teachers to reduce their workload and is providing more help for special needs children. It's 5 past 5. The woman who conducted a review of the conduct and culture at New Zealand football has painted a damning picture of the environment within the national women's team under former coach Andreas Haraf. New Zealand football has today released the public findings of the independent review, upholding complaints made by members of the football ferns. Employment lawyer Philippa Muir led the review and conducted more than 80 interviews, and she did not paint a pleasant picture of the culture created by Haraf within the team.
It was raised voices, it was yelling, it was intimidation, it was repeated. He offended, humiliated some of those players and some of the staff, and this has had an impact on all of the 12 players who complained and on a number of staff.
New Zealand Football Independent Reviewer Philippa Muir. The veteran hooker Isaac Luke has confirmed he will stay with the Warriors Rugby League side next year. Despite speculation he might leave because the Warriors were only able to offer him a reduced contract, Luke has announced he has re-signed with the Auckland-based NRL club on a one-year deal. 31-year-old Luke was a key player in the Warriors breaking a 7-year finals drought in this year's competition. And organisers of the ASB Classic Tennis Tournament have confirmed current world number 2 Caroline Wozniacki will be returning for a 5th time. Wozniacki will be looking to go one better than her finals appearance in Auckland earlier this year. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a window on the Greek province of Macedonia was at the Macedonia Republic. Our drama meditates on friendship in the early years of the 21st century, and there's a sofa session from Ebb and Sparrow. Join me, Brian Crump, afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, fine, apart from isolated afternoon showers. Scattered rain tomorrow, possibly heavy in the north and east. Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine spells, isolated showers mainly about the ranges, some possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon north of Taihape. Wellington and Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast. Often cloudy, patchy drizzle about Kapiti Coast tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, mainly fine. Isolated showers about the Nelson and Marlborough ranges this afternoon or this evening. Scattered rain developing in southern Canterbury late tomorrow. For Buller, mostly fine, however a few showers developing tomorrow morning. For Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Rain with heavy force developing in Fiordland and Westland tomorrow. Otago and Southland, fine, a period of rain tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine with cloudy periods tomorrow as well. RNZ National. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Alex Perrottet.
Thanks very much, Anna. Tonight, calls for the President and the Board of New Zealand Football to resign after a damning report into the governing body's conduct and culture. The independent review, headed by Philippa Muir, found the former Football Ferns head coach, Andreas Haraf, crossed the line with his coaching manner. Here's what she had to say this afternoon.
I find that Mr Haraf breached New Zealand Football's Code of Conduct, harassment policy and WorkSafe New Zealand's bullying guidelines. I want to make the point that the harassment was not sexual in any form and it wasn't assault, but it was raised voices, it was yelling, it was intimidation, it was repeated. He offended, humiliated some of those players and some of the staff, and this has had an impact on all of the 12 players who complained and on a number of staff. Some New Zealand football managers were told of player and staff concerns after the Spain tour, but no action was taken.
Now that's Philippa Muir, the report writer, talking about the conduct of the former Football Ferns coach Andreas Haraf. The report also slammed New Zealand football itself for ignoring complaints and failing to act. Former All-White Sam Malcolmson, who represented New Zealand between 1976 and 1982, says the report's finally brought to light what many people in and around the game have believed for years. He says change needs to happen quickly and at the top, so the President, Derek Shaw, should resign. He also had harsh words for former CEO Andy Martin, who was also the subject of complaints but could not be investigated due to his confidential retirement agreement in June.
Very disappointed but not surprised. I mean, under Martin's steersmanship, there's been nothing going very well. It's been a toxic area New Zealand football. It's been a laughing stock of what's happened. And I just feel that the thing that's came out loud and clear is that appointments should not have been made, and were made obviously by Martin. And I think that it's just taken so long to come here, because New Zealand football is probably the lowest it's been for decades. And under this report, I think the one thing that's loud and clear is the chairman should go. I mean, the chairman was very close to the CEO, and also his friends, etc., in the board. And I think that he's the one thing that has to go. And without him gone, then New Zealand football can't really start afresh. And I mean, looking at the appointments of the coach, the national coach, the football firm's coach, the director of football, all under Martin, and all under the whys and wherefores, and allowed by the chairman, Shaw. So I mean, I think it's very important that we start making changes immediately. But also, I think there's got to be a clear out at the very top.
There's a bit of detail in this report about the behaviour of the former Football Ferns coach Andreas Heraf, and it accuses him, it says that he's guilty really of harassment and bullying. But there's also detail that says it can't go into information about complaints laid against the former CEO Andy Martin due to his departure agreement, I guess, when he resigned back in June. Is it reading too much into it to sense a bit of frustration there in the report writers that detail can't come out?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there has been bullying, and I feel the football it's been brave of the football firms and the players to allow it to happen. I mean, they were the brave ones that allowed it to happen, and they should not have had to go through all the pain, all the bullying, especially by somebody that wasn't involved in New Zealand football, didn't understand the culture, and really, it all comes still back, even if there's confidentiality for the CEO. He made the appointment, and I mean, the way Hudson went as well, I mean, there's a lot of cloud over that and what happened there. And just everything about the coaching, everything about the administration, everything about what the football firms has had to sort of suffer. It's the game is at the lowest ebb it's ever been, and it's in disrepute. And that is really very sad when one thinks of 2010, the only team in the World Cup never to lose. And that when we think of Tony Reid and what he'd done with the football firms, put them up in the top 20 in the World Cup, in standings, and look where they are now. It's really a very, very sad state of affairs.
Now, Sam, this review is looking at 13 complaints that were laid, and they're all exclusively from the football ferns. They're not from the All Whites or other people around the game. The people looking into this report interviewed a whole host of people. From the tone I'm getting from you, though, it sounds like you do have a bone to pick yourself. What are your personal grievances with New Zealand football?
I think the freedom is probably it hasn't been transparent. I think the transparency has been lacking completely. I think in the men's side as well that nobody's bothered to listen to the former players or the former coaches in the history. Who's actually spoke to Adshead? Who spoke to Jones? Who spoke to Kevin Fallon? Who's asked for input? And what happened in the administration with New Zealand football in the men's side is all the people from New Zealand football have gone. All the people who were running have gone. And there's people there that, to me, haven't got a background in football, have got no knowledge of what the history and the culture that goes back many, many years. And that, to me, is the frustrating, is that just you didn't know who to go to. There was no transparency, especially we're talking about the senior teams. The game, perhaps, at youth level and probably with the youngsters, there's a lot of good plans there and there's a lot of good kids. But unless we have a pathway for these guys when they get to maybe teenagers, then we're going to be struggling.
So you're calling for the chair to resign. What else needs to happen moving forward?
Well, I think some of the board have got to go because, I mean, that's another complaint by a lot of people. There's a lack of football people on the board. There's been very little people and very little sort of football knowledge and history and understanding of the game. It's okay saying you know football because you played at school or because you did that, but there's a hell of a lot of understanding that goes into the game off the field, not just on the field, and this is where we should be using a lot of our experience, the people that we have around the game. And I'd like it to, now that the shall we say, the reporters become, that changes take place and take place very quickly.
That's former All White Sam Malcolmson. The background noise, apologies there. We did speak to him while he awaited his plane to depart. Of course, all above board. It was before the doors were closed as he got on. So that's Sam Malcolmson, played for the All Whites in the 70s and 80s. Now, Derek Shaw is the president of New Zealand Football. I spoke to him just before we came on air this evening and asked him if he would resign.
The board has met today and has received the report and is fully committed to adopting the recommendations in the report. So the board's made that commitment. And it's really up to the membership of New Zealand Football in terms of the board's long-term future. But in the meantime, we've got a job to do, and we see that as really the key focus right now.
OK, you see there's a job to do. What the report is saying is that a job was not done. There are calls out there today for you to resign. Why won't you resign?
That's really a matter for the members of New Zealand Football to take that decision. I've made a personal commitment to implement the findings of the review. I think that's sort of critical, and that's the commitment of the board. If the membership of New Zealand Football want us to step down, I think that's appropriate. But I think in the meantime, the feedback I've had from members of New Zealand Football is there's a job to do, and we expect you to do it. You've set up the review. We agreed to terms of reference for the PFA. And we committed to the review, and we've committed to its findings.
Derek,
and so we should continue to move on that basis.
Now, Derek, there's been a lot of attention around the former Football Ferns coach Andreas Hedaf, and there are findings that he harassed and bullied players. However, in terms of the full context of the report, that's only a small part. The great bulk, the meat in this report is a damning assessment on the way that New Zealand football has been run. Surely you need to take responsibility for this.
We have taken responsibility, and we're certainly looking at the role of the board and the relative committees that sit there. Obviously, HR has been an area that we've been forward in terms of policies and processes. That's really evident around the recruitment activity. There's work to be done around diversity and inclusion. We've had matters, I guess, around the pathways and development of our national coaches, so they're all sort of critical. I think, certainly from our perspective, we've apologised to the firms. We've recognised and supported those people that have come forward.
I'll take you up on that, Derek, because you said you've supported those who have come forward. This report released today says very clearly that after the Spain tour, a member of staff wanted a full review into that tour. That review did not happen, and the staff member resigned and in their exit interview said, "This is why I'm resigning, because action is not taken. You are ignoring the complaints." So that's false. You're saying you've listened to complaints, that's the very subject matter of this report, that those complaints were not listened to. Have you let down your players and the other administrators involved in New Zealand football?
That complaint didn't come to the board. It went through to management. So the board had no visibility at that point on that process. And we've certainly, that's an area that we're focusing on in terms of our tour reports. The Exco now has quite a strong risk management process around tours going out, but we haven't had good reporting processes on tours coming back.
Well, there's a very clear culture problem here, Derek. Very clear culture issue that comes through this report. How can you change course now without a clear out of the board? That's what's been called for. The board also is responsible for recruitment, and we've had calls from Sam Malcolmson, former All White, saying that this recruitment has been a problem for many, many years, not just right now in terms of Andreas Hedaf and others. So how can you change a culture if really it's a status quo in terms of personnel running and running the ship?
No, it's not. It's not actually in terms of people managing the business. Two key people in the organisation have gone. We've got an interim chief executive. We've got quite different processes sitting around panels and recruitment. In fact, we're in the process of recruiting a Ferns coach right now. We've got a very experienced panel that are oversighting that, and also the Exco will be providing sign-off on that appointment. So those are things that haven't necessarily happened through the management processes in the past period.
Derek, the report says that New Zealand football is a boys' club, and there's banter that amounts to harassment. Do you agree with that?
I think the report speaks for itself around that. We've certainly moved to adopt the recommendations.
So you agree that it's a boys' club?
Well, I can't comment. That's a matter for the reviewer. She's found that, and we've said on that basis then we...
But do you agree with it? It's pretty simple to say whether you agree with it or not. It's been found that it's a boys' club. Is that true or false?
Yeah, that's her findings. I'm just accepting her findings because we didn't conduct the review. The reviewer has done the review with an independent process. So that's her finding.
But you are accepting that?
We're on the basis of that. We are essentially moving around greater focuses, as the reviewer has said, around diversity and inclusion and what we need to do.
That's Derek Shaw, the president of New Zealand Football. He's saying he's staying put amid calls for him to resign. He did concede in that interview that it would be appropriate if New Zealand Football called for him and the board to stand down to do so. We will be getting you the very latest on this in the next day or so. It's 5:20. A bad batch of synthetic drugs affecting Christchurch is now being blamed for killing at least one person. St John Ambulance today revealed that a recent death is being linked to the same synthetic drugs which have put another 19 people in hospital. Now, the drugs' effects are causing chaos for local ambulance crews. One paramedic has been seriously assaulted. This is while helping a patient who was in the grips of a synthetics high. Our reporter Logan Church reports.
I cannot stress enough that I will not allow my staff to be put at risk, and so we will get the police protection because our staff's welfare comes first.
That is St John's Craig Downing, issuing a stern warning to the drugged-up patients who are assaulting his staff. This comes as Christchurch is in the grips of what has been described on checkpoints as a public health emergency. Symptoms include hallucinations, seizures, aggression, paranoia, anxiety, overheating. It's not a nice list. Since then, people have continued to pour into the emergency department. A total of 19 have arrived, ranging in age from 17 to 59 years old. 2 of them are still fighting for their life in ICU. Craig says these patients are incredibly hard to manage.
These patients are unpredictable. They can be really challenging to manage. And what I mean by that is that our staff are getting exposed to patients who are acting out both physically and verbally towards our staff. This is unacceptable. We don't accept that at all. And as a result, sometimes the treatment regimes that we have to do with these people is to sedate them for their own safety and the staff safety. And what we're finding is that these patients are really aggressive and really challenging to manage. It's a very difficult situation because we don't know what's in this chemical. We don't know what's in this drug.
And this boiled over in an attack on an ambulance officer over the weekend.
Last Saturday night we had a particular case that the ambulance officers responded to. They attended to a person and whilst in the back of the ambulance, that person, without provocation or without warning, violently attacked one of my staff. We don't see that as acceptable in any level whatsoever. Our staff go about doing their job because they care. They don't expect to go home having been assaulted.
The news also came this morning that at least one death has been linked to this bad batch of synthetic drugs. Checkpoint's been told ambulance officers responded to a call-out for a person who appeared to have taken synthetics. But while trying to help the patients, their health went rapidly downhill. Nothing could be done.
This is a poison that is entering people's bodies. It is having profound effects on them.
The police are refusing to comment further on the death. They have maintained a consistent message of do not take synthetics, but clearly that's not getting through to some people. I asked Detective Inspector Greg Merson if he believed that message was still the right message.
It is. I mean, the bottom line is if you don't take these drugs, you won't put yourself at risk. And the problem is people don't know what they're taking. And, you know, it's called synthetic cannabis, but it's not cannabis. It's synthetic drugs. It's just a plant form that has been I would say, contaminated with chemicals and then sold to unsuspecting buyers. And those chemicals can be anything. And also, it's not just the so-called synthetic cannabis, it's pills as well. It's all synthetics. And pills are just as dangerous as the drugs you smoke.
While everyone agrees this bad batch of synthetics is particularly bad, Craig Downing says spikes of synthetic drug-using patients are common nowadays.
We do see it periodically throughout the year. There's no real rhyme reason for it, there's no pattern to it, it's just whatever appears.
But the message for synthetic drug users is clear. Don't assault the ambulance crew. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ahi nei, ko Logan Church tēnei.
Coming up to 25 minutes past 5, aid efforts are slowly swinging into action in Sulawesi, where survivors of last week's earthquake and tsunami face drastic shortages of food, water and shelter. More than 1,300 people are now known to have died in the disaster, but dozens are still believed to be buried beneath the rubble and debris. The 72-hour window of survival has now passed, and officials expect the death toll to rise significantly. Officials have now reached the 4 worst-hit areas, but only a small number of rescuers have made it in. The UN estimates there's at least 200,000 people in the affected region, and all of them are in urgent need. CNN's Matt Rivers is on the ground in the devastated city of Palu, among the body bags, the devastation and the growing frustration among survivors.
4 soldiers to a bag. They dragged the person inside to a crude resting place, a hastily dug mass grave on a Palu hillside, a direct result of an earthquake and tsunami no one was prepared for. There's 194 people buried here, some of whom are still unidentified. These are brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, grandparents, friends, and they all just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Authorities had laid hundreds of bodies in the streets for days after the morgues ran out of room. Officials say the bodies could spread disease. The unidentified bodies did have their pictures taken, so hopefully they can be ID'd later. A short drive away, those lucky enough to be alive gather in a place where life is hard. A makeshift camp designed to help the newly homeless is widely unable to meet people's needs. Baby Muhammad is sick. Even if they had formula, which they don't, water here is scarce.
Drinkable water. We are very short of drinkable water.
For others, the indignity of living outside is exacerbated.
We need public toilets. None are provided to us. There are some here, but they are all broken and can't be used.
So 5 days on, in camps like these, there's a lack of electricity, of food, of water, of health care, of hygiene. It's no wonder people are getting frustrated, and they're increasingly blaming the government for what has pretty obviously been a slow response. Fuel has been scarce too, with few stations open. If you follow the rules and line up, you could trade a day just for a few liters. So the way you join the line is by taking your gas container and running rope through the handle. Basically, the rope snakes all the way around and ends at the only gas pump that's open right now. So you hook up, you move it up the line, and you wait. These people wouldn't wait. We watched them loot fuel tanks underneath the ground, bamboo poles dipped in, coming up full. Armed soldiers merely watched. They told us they didn't want to spark a riot. They just want to run their bikes or generators. Another said it's not like there's anywhere else they could get it fast. Dozens of people, though, have been arrested for looting citywide. The government says there have been challenges in their aid mission, but that overall they're making the best of a bad situation. And yes, help is slowly increasing. Aid ships are en route and aid flights are picking up, but not fast enough. Looting, thirsty babies, hungry kids, filthy camps, and mass burials do not equal an effective disaster response.
CNN's Matt Rivers in Palu. We will have more after 6 on this. We'll cross to David Lipson, who's finally got himself to Palu as well after a 15-hour drive. So tune in, or keep tuning in after 6 for more from Sulawesi. It's 28 past 5. It's been described as a filthy, squalid slum, but for some, it's the only home they've got. The former St Joseph's Catholic Convent on Great North Road in Auckland's Grey Lynn houses those with few other options. The notorious boarding house is one of the last resorts before the streets. In June, the building sold for $4.1 million to make way for tourist accommodation. Yesterday, the 30 tenants were supposed to have packed up and left, but today, many remain. Eva Corlett met Fox, who's lived at the hostel for 3 years.
I've been in this room for just over 2.5. I lived in a small room that we lovingly call the toilet.
Fox rolls a smoke as he speaks to me in his room, where there are no signs of him packing to leave.
I don't really want to live here, but I need some place to stay, right? And because places. There's no more artist studios and, it's all been ripped down for the yuppies to have their ring-you-wear attractors and blah, 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 and so on and so forth.
Written on the corridor's walls are the words, "It was hell while it lasted."
It could have been so much better than what it was. It's just like down and out people get down and out, and when they lose self-respect and stop loving themselves, then they don't love the environment they're in, and something, I don't know what it is about them, they got to bring their environment down to match their attitudes for them to feel comfortable.
Over the weekend, a man was found dead in his room. Another week, another death.
You can get used to unconscious bodies and stepping over people that just don't bother to see whether they're living or not, I find that really bad in myself, right? But then I thought, well, he's asleep, he's in a nicer place than being awake here.
The bones of the building are beautiful. 1920s Spanish mission-style concrete, the colour of custard, and grime. Today they're surrounded with high wire fences. Fox comments that he always knew he was living in a zoo. At the back of the property, the garden once loved has now gone to seed.
Yeah, beautiful. This could be so much. But nobody wanted to do it, there's this beautiful space here. It's got wild cabbages. Michael, that used to live here, he was a qualified botanist, horticulturalist, and he used to grow his vegetables and make, but nobody was into cleaning up their space. They just wanted to just go deeper into their depressions, and this place gave them an excuse not to get up. Toilets, mess, death in there.
Inside, doors are kicked in, windows shattered. There are rooms piled high with scavenged junk. A front room is blackened from a fire just last night. The smoke sits in your nose. Former streeties, addicts, people with severe mental health issues and those with nowhere else to go populate the rooms. It costs them around $200 a week. But despite the landlord, Renton Turner, taking in upwards of $300,000 a year, there is one stove and one washing machine. There isn't even a kettle. Fox says the landlord gave up on the place.
Whatever damage that gets done, it's just going to be superficial and dollars will fix it, right? But when a house has no soul and no love or anything like that, you can't buy anything that's going to make that exist.
Many tenants moved out when they heard about the building's sale, but others have nowhere else to go. Fox has a meeting booked with Work and Income to assess his housing eligibility, but until then, he'll have to start packing up his treasures.
This is me, this is my room, this is my things, this is my personality, this is my home. To be handed a piece of paper saying you've got 30 days to get out, plans, don't make them. Just live, let the wind blow you where you want to go.
I tāmaki makoro mo te hōtaka o te iahiahi nei, ko Eva Corlett tēnei.
Coming up on Checkpoint, calls for primary school girls to be educated about periods. Oamaru's historic courthouse is about to get a new lease of life as well. And we'll hopefully have some of your feedback. If you want to get in touch, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Of course, we're on Facebook, Checkpoint, or email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Plenty more to come, but first, here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
Thanks, Alex. Football New Zealand has been told to apologise and offer counselling to women players who complained about the national coach Andreas Haraf. A review by employment lawyer Philippa Muir has found that 12 football ferns would not keep playing for the team while Mr Haraf was coach. Ms Muir says his behaviour included repeated yelling and intimidation, which offended and humiliated the players and some of the staff. A woman charged with being in contempt of court in Auckland this afternoon has been brought back out from the cells. Jurors said she approached them and told them her views on the case of rugby coach and teacher aide Alosio Taimo at the High Court in Auckland. Mr Taimo faces multiple charges of sexually abusing children and is giving evidence in his own defence. Jurors told the judge the woman said she believed what Mr Taimo was saying, and that meant the culprit is still out there. Justice Moore said her actions strike at the heart of the justice system and what she had done was stupid and irresponsible. A batch of synthetic drugs that's put 19 people in hospital in Christchurch is now being blamed for at least one death. St John Ambulance says the drugs' effects are causing chaos for ambulance crews. A spokesperson says one paramedic was seriously assaulted while helping a patient who seemed to be in the grips of a synthetics high. Some tenants of an Auckland boarding house are refusing to budge despite it closing down, saying they have nowhere else to go. The former St Joseph's Catholic convent in Grey Lynn was considered a last resort before sleeping on the streets. In June, the building sold for more than $4 million and will be used for tourist accommodation. Members of the primary and secondary teachers' unions have both rejected pay increases of about 9.3% over 3 years. Teachers say there is no single measure that would encourage them to accept the government offer, and it is not just about the money. The Education Ministry says it is already working to reduce teachers' workloads and providing more help for special needs children. And those are the headlines.
Thank you very much, Anna. We'll see you at 6 o'clock. Madison Reedy is here for Business News. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
So Fletcher, they've had their own problems in the past, but now they're getting ambitious. They want to buy out Steel and Tube.
Yes, they're making some big offers this time around. So they have made a confidential offer. It was actually earlier last month on September 10. They made this offer confidentially, so we only found out about it today, typically how these things go. And the offer is to buy Steel and Tube, which is its major competitor. So some may not know that Fletcher Building does have its own Fletcher Steel business as well, which is one of its pretty lucrative divisions there. It actually made about $532 million in sales in the financial year 18, so that's the year just ended. So it wants to buy Steel and Tube for a value of $282 million, and that's giving it about $1.70 per share. So that's they may think a pretty decent offer. So we actually spoke to Fletcher's Chief Executive Ross Taylor today and asked him, why are you doing this and what's the process here? He said it's not necessarily a formal takeover offer. It's more of a what they call a scheme of arrangement, which means that they have shareholder support.
We've given them an offer and we're looking to work with them to agree a scheme of arrangement with them and then put that to shareholders for a vote. And you'll note that at the same time as we've been talking to Steel and Tube's board, we've been talking confidentially to some of the major Steel and Tube shareholders, and over 20% of them would like to see this proposal progressed and put to shareholders.
Do you have a time frame for how long it's going to take you to negotiate this? How long is your expectation?
No particular time frame, but we've been talking for 3 weeks, so it doesn't need to go on that much longer from my perspective.
Now, that's the CEO of Fletcher, Ross Taylor, talking to Nana Peltier. What is the response from Steel and Tube to this?
Steel and Tube's Chief Executive Mark Malpass is his name, gave it a big thumbs down, for lack of a better term. He called the offer opportunistic because Steel and Tube has had some issues of late. It was one of kind of the major victims of the construction woes, being a supplier of steel to some major construction projects. It really felt some issues there. It did have a big kind of profit loss of $20 million compared to an actual profit of $32 million the year before that. So he's called this just an opportunity. While it's almost like taking a hit while they're down.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sounds like it.
Exactly.
I imagine the Commerce Commission will want to have something to say about it.
And that's absolutely something that he noted as well. He said, this will kind of pull the eyes and possibly the scrutiny of the Commerce Commission. Two competitors merging looks like something they may or may not have something to say about it.
Right. Now, it's been a pretty good year for Ports of Auckland in terms of profit. Any indication what they want to spend their millions on or invest in it in?
So the port in downtown Auckland there, which is actually owned by Auckland Council, it made a net profit after tax of $76.8 million. That's up about $16 million on the year earlier, so certainly a good year for them. Their container volumes were up about 2.2%, but they have had some serious issues down there as well. I mean, they had a fire yesterday. That's just, the latest, but they are certainly lacking space, lacking staff. They also had to give in the year to June, they had to give $1.5 million to some casual staff. Again, they were hit by that miscalculation of holiday pay, as a lot of companies have been recently. We've seen that in a lot of results. Also, rising fuel costs hit them too, of about $1 million. But all of that was drowned out by making about $18 million from its joint venture businesses and assets there. So pretty good. They are going to spend it on tech. is what they tell me. So tech sustainability, the likes of solar powers down there, they have 3 cranes coming from China that cost about $12 million a pop each typically. They haven't actually given us an exact figure on that, but that's the ballpark cost of them. They're coming from China and they're arriving on Friday.
Wow. Sounds exciting.
If you're into ports, it sure is.
Yeah, and solar power and renewables coming from China. Very
Even
interesting.
LED lights on the port, actually.
Wow, very good. Moving with the times. Financial markets, have they been moving?
Yeah, they have. So the NZX Top 50 Index closed down about 1/3% tonight. So that's 33 points down to close at 9,294. Those companies we mentioned about that kind of takeover offer between Fletcher's, Steel and Tube's share price actually gained on that news. So their share price was up 17% to $1.56, which is still below that $1.70 offer from Fletcher's. Fletcher's share price actually went down about 1.5%, 10-cent drop to $6.48. And the NZ dollar's buying at 65.8 US cents, 91.6 Australian and 50.6 British pence.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the update. Madison Reedy there with the business news at exactly 20 minutes to 6. Businesses spending at least $50,000 a year on research and development will be in line for a 15% tax credit. This is under the government's ramped-up scheme to encourage investment in innovation. The coalition government promised to bring back R&D tax credits, which were scrapped by National in favour of a grants-based system. But today it unveiled changes to the initial proposal after consulting with the business sector. Our reporter Sarah Robson was at the announcement in Auckland.
At the headquarters of showerhead and tap designer Methvin, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern had a look at some of the company's latest products.
You can go from firm right the way through, and at that end the spray is so fine that
Methvin is one of the big-name companies ready to cash in on the government's research and development tax incentive scheme. The 15% credit will kick in next year for companies spending at least $50,000 on new innovations. Jacinda Ardern says similar sorts of schemes are in place in other countries and they do work.
It does make a difference. New Zealand's been lagging for the fact that we haven't had one. We're hoping now this will create an incentive for business to invest in research and development.
The government wants to grow spending on R&D to 2% of GDP by 2027. When it came out with its initial proposals earlier this year, it had set the tax credit rate at 12.5%, with a minimum R&D spending threshold of $100,000. But after consultation with businesses and the wider innovation sector, changes were made, and Jacinda Ardern says more businesses will benefit.
So we will see startups, smaller enterprises, all now eligible. We've lowered the spending threshold, we've increased the rate of the incentive, it's competitive, and we're hoping as a result we'll really see investment and innovation, which is part of New Zealand's psyche.
The government has set aside $1 billion over 4 years for the incentive scheme. Methvin's chief executive, David Banfield, says certainty is crucial for encouraging long-term investment.
those criteria give us the confidence to know that we don't have to go through a process to actually achieve the tax incentive. We can start and continue in that way.
And David Banfield isn't too worried about different governments changing the way they encourage spending on R&D.
I think what's important is the confidence that New Zealand governments support New Zealand businesses internationally, and that's the thing that gives us the desire and confidence to continue to invest in the future.
But the tech startup sector is a little more cautious in welcoming the moves. The government is still trying to come up with a way to make the system work for loss-making companies and will be undertaking further consultation. Miriana Lowry from One Centre, a trade account software firm, says like many tech startups, her company is still making a loss, but she was eligible for R&D grants under the previous scheme. She's eagerly awaiting more details, but she says there is a place for the government to back the tech sector.
The contribution that the government's making holistically to the technology sector, I think, is brilliant. They just need to keep going, not be afraid.
A temporary measure to provide some refundable tax credits for startups and loss-making businesses will be in place while further work is done. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
It's 16 and a half minutes to 6. New research shows New Zealand girls as young as 8 years old are now getting their period, which could lead to serious social consequences if not handled properly. The University of Otago researchers say, based on their findings, primary school education around periods is going to have to start a lot sooner than it does now. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
A charity that supports children in low decile schools says girls are now missing class at a younger age as they struggle to cope with their periods. Kids Can Chief Executive Julie Chapman says adding to the problem is a family's inability to pay for sanitary products.
Girls are staying home from school, they're using things like cut-up nappies, socks, toilet paper, which only increases that sense of embarrassment and shame.
For the first time, New Zealand has collected national level data on age of first menstruation. It's just been released from the government's 2014-2015 New Zealand Health Survey. It found that nationwide, while most girls began getting their period in years 7 and 8, about 1 in 16 girls started menstruating at primary school. Dr. Sarah Donovan from Otago University's Department of Public Health says the findings are significant for a number of reasons.
While we're starting to get an awareness that issues around menstrual management are problematic for some women and girls in particular, the issue of period poverty and not being able to afford menstrual gear to manage periods, it hasn't really occurred to us that it might be happening to this very young age group who, more than any other group, really need our support.
Jenny Bernard is principal at West Auckland's Burwood Primary School. She says it's not uncommon for girls to start getting their period in year 5.
I've noticed at my school that girls having periods are starting in about year 5, which is possibly 9, 10 years old, which is a lot younger than perhaps what would have happened maybe 10 years ago.
The new research has also revealed that pain and its management is something else parents and schools have to consider as a reason for absences. Ms Bernard says the school takes it seriously.
The girls just come into the sick bay and they'll just say, what they need, and then we'll just give it to them. But quite often they're quite well prepared for a period.
Sarah Donovan says missed school means missed life opportunities, which is worse for girls already socially disadvantaged. Julie Chapman says the research confirms what they're seeing with Kids Can. Last year, the charity supplied students with just over 15,000 boxes of sanitary products, 83% more than in 2016. This year, it's already surpassed that total.
Over the last 4 years, we have seen an increase in the need for feminine hygiene products across the schools we support, and in particular across primary and intermediate schools.
Why it's happening is not yet exactly clear, but Dr. Donovan says international data shows the age when girls begin menstruating is lowering around the world. Environmental factors are one possible cause.
Theories about environmental toxins which are kind of disrupting normal hormones, and then also an increasing body mass index, has been theorised to increase hormones that trigger onset of menstruation. So it's quite sort of complex science behind that.
Dr. Donovan says the new data will also serve to better support parents in having the conversation with girls at a younger age.
Some may not feel very comfortable doing that, but I think in this day and age it'd be great if the arrival of a young girl's first period is like, it's a huge developmental milestone, it's something to celebrate rather than for something for her to feel embarrassed and ashamed of.
Dr. Donovan is preparing an application to Pharmac to fund free sanitary products for all school-aged girls in New Zealand. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Now, just staying on the subject of periods, because we don't dwell on it for too long, but this is interesting news and timely, so we'll let you know about it. Australian women are celebrating, and this is because after an 18-year campaign, the country's states and territories have all agreed to make tampons and other sanitary products exempt from GST. The 10% tax has long been described as unfair, partly because products such as condoms and Viagra are exempt from it. The exemption is part, of course, of bigger changes to GST and how the states and the federation, how basically the country collects GST and redistributes it to the states. It's 11.5 minutes to 6. Nearly half of Napier Port should be put up for sale unless locals are prepared to stomach their rates jumping by more than 50%. That's the proposal being put forward by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, which wants to look at selling up to 49% of the port through a public share offering in order to pay for the port's development. And while the council says it's open to other money-raising ideas, if part of the port isn't sold, then rates will go up by more than half over the next year. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
Napier Port is bursting at the seams. With Hawke's Bay commodities and tourism in hot demand, the port's having to turn away cruise and container ships because it can't fit them in. The port needs to spend around $350 million on an upgrade, including $142 million on a new wharf. It also needs to repay nearly $90 million in debt. To raise this cash, it would either have to up rates by 53%, or, its preferred option, sell just under half the port to the public by listing it on the stock market. Councillor Fenton Wilson echoed the sentiments around the council table this morning that the former would be unpalatable.
Considering we've already put the rates up 30% in the last 2 years, there's no more blood in the stone, in my humble opinion, out there in our community.
A stock market listing was just one of 4 options considered. The others were raising rates, selling a stake to an investor, or a long-term lease to another operator. Chair Rex Graham says a long-term lease was initially the council's preferred option, but it changed its mind.
The first change really came when I talked to the union boys, and they put some doubt into my mind. They said that it wasn't so successful in places and I should check this one, which I did. And just a continual conversation with them, I started to learn that actually this was not as simple as it was.
Rex Graham says the union supports a share market listing, and he says ratepayers will be given preference when it comes to buying shares. 2 regional councillors, Debbie Hewitt and Paul Bailey, voted against the proposal. Ms Hewitt says that's because she doesn't have a preferred option and it should be up to the public to decide.
It is the jewel in the crown of Hawke's Bay's regional strategic assets, and it's incredibly important that the public does have their say in.
The public will now have 4 weeks to do just that. Napier locals had mixed feelings about a potential share sale.
As long as it didn't go international, if it stayed in our own country, I don't think that's such a bad thing.
I think sometimes these things are best in public ownership rather than being in private ownership, but see how it goes. Yeah.
So if the council didn't do anything and would have to pay for the port's expansion itself, rates would increase 53% next year.
Yeah, but the profits would come back to the community anyhow, so it'd probably offset it at the end of the day, offset it.
I'm not sure. I used to work there, so yeah, that'll be all right if the public owned it, yeah.
It's probably a good idea.
And why do you think it's a good idea?
Well, it spreads the cost, doesn't it? Mm-hmm.
If they didn't do that, then apparently it would push up rates by 53% next year because they would have to pay for the development itself.
Sell.
Some thought a decision should be the subject of a referendum, with suggestions it could be held at the local body election next year. The council's chief executive, James Palmer, says if 5% of the public want a referendum, they'll call one, but he warns that could leave it too late.
There is some urgency with this decision. There are vessels being turned away from the port today. Every week, month that is delayed in terms of raising the capital to fund the new wharf is business being turned away from the Port of Napier.
One of those campaigning for a referendum, businesswoman Anna Lork, says there's no reason a referendum couldn't be held sooner.
If we did have it at the local election time, it's about $50,000 compared to about $250,000, but no one can put a price on democracy.
The Regional Council hopes to make a final decision on the port's future before the end of the year. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
It's 7 minutes to 6. A Canadian scientist who pioneered the use of lasers has just put another big crack in science's glass ceiling. Donna Strickland has become the first woman to win the Nobel Prize for Physics in more than 50 years. She shared the prize with the American Arthur Ashkin, who's 96, and the Frenchman Gérard Moreau. The BBC's Victoria Gill has the details.
2018 Nobel Prize in Physics.
The ultimate scientific accolade. And Professor Donna Strickland is only the 3rd woman ever to have won a Nobel Prize in Physics. She and her fellow winners were honoured for what the Nobel Committee called groundbreaking inventions in laser physics. Professor Strickland devised a way to use lasers as very precise drilling or cutting tools. Millions of eye operations are performed every year with these sharpest of laser beams.
How surprising do you think it is that you're the third woman to win this prize?
Well, that is surprising, isn't it? I think that's the story that people want to talk about, that why should it take 60 years? There's so many women out there doing fantastic research, so why does it take so long to get recognised?
Here at Oxford's Department of Nuclear Physics,
physics still has one of the largest gender gaps in science. One recent study concluded that at the current rates it would be more than 2 centuries until there were equal numbers of senior male and female researchers in the field.
Not only is this great for women, it's great for early career researchers that you can make discoveries and inventions that will change the world, and you can do that at any point in your career, and it doesn't matter what background or gender you are.
The last woman to win a physics Nobel was German-born Maria Goeppert-Mayer in 1963 for her discoveries about the nuclei of atoms. Before that, it was Marie Curie who shared the 1903 prize with her husband Pierre. This year's winners hope that breaking this half-century hiatus will mean the focus in future will be on the research rather than the gender of the researcher.
That's Victoria Gill reporting. Now to Oamaru, where the town is preparing to officially reopen its courthouse tomorrow after years of fighting to keep its justice services. The 135-year-old courthouse was closed in December 2011 after being deemed earthquake-prone. Faced with remedial costs in the millions and inmates travelling outside the district to attend to court, the community banded together to save the historic landmark and its services. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton has the story.
The future of the courthouse looked dire when a government engineering report found strengthening it could cost upwards of $4 million. It was shut down, forcing the town's court services to be held in its opera house before being set up in a porta court in a local hotel car park. But lawyer Bill Dean says that facility wasn't big enough to cater all of its services, forcing some locals to have to travel more than an hour away to a court in Timaru or Dunedin. He says the fight to keep court services in Oamaru was a David and Goliath situation.
This is a very strong Oamaru stone building. It's using blocks of stones about the size of an armchair. I suppose initially a figure of $4 to $6 million was going to make it very difficult to retain the court. Under those numbers, it was probably going to be a case of, well, we'll just shut it down.
But instead of feeling defeated, Mr. Dean did his own research, employing an engineer to assess the courthouse, then asking for a price tag on the proposed repairs. The cost was closer to $350,000, and the assessment found the building was unlikely to collapse in an earthquake and didn't need to be closed in the first place. But Mr. Dean says it took several years for paperwork to be accepted and remedial work to be completed.
The Oamaru Court's very important from my career. It's been the court that I've appeared in ever since I've been in practice. So I would hate it to have seen it, shut and just fall into disrepair.
Waitaki District Mayor Gary Kircher says the community is jubilant the courthouse will reopen and offer justice services once again. In the end, the council paid $900,000 to strengthen and refurbish the building, which Mr. Kircher says was money well spent for the district.
Absolutely has been a community effort. Everyone involved with it has helped us to get this great result. So it's just something to really be celebrated, and that's what we'll be doing when we do the opening.
Waitaki District Archives curator Chris Meach says the courthouse harks back to Oamaru's righteous early days, where more than 13% of the town's population appeared in court.
It was called a drunken metropolis and the best crime-producing district in Otago. It was also conspicuous for its want of reverence for religion.
The courthouse emerged during a prosperous time, not long after the breakwater was built, opening up a deep water harbour and a railway link connected Oamaru to Christchurch and Dunedin. It cost close to £3,000, roughly $524,000 to build, paid out of the government's coffers.
When Forrester and Lemon completed the construction of this building, I think they've left something that the town has really taken into its character. Now that we've got it back open again as a courthouse, it's a long-running function for a historic building. It's just wonderful to see that in a town that values heritage.
The courthouse will be officially opened by Justice Minister Andrew Little tomorrow morning. In Dunedin, mō te hōtaka o te ahipone, ko Tess Brunton tēnei.
Thank you, Tess. It's coming up to 6 o'clock. There's been a bit of feedback. Logan Church had a report early, probably around about 5:15. You can go and look at it, actually, because there's footage there, and it's about synthetics and people in hospital. One person has died that we heard. A lot of people still recovering in hospital after this bad batch of synthetic drugs. So we've got a bit of feedback. One texter says violent people posing a threat to any medical staff should be denied treatment. A public health service paid for by taxes should only be New Zealand citizens who present themselves for treatment. There's another point of view. The police should be called to deal with violence. Along the same lines, Ian has got in touch and says, are the manufacturers of synthetic cannabis putting what was called angel dust in the mix? We might find out about that. He says angel dust causes these deaths and psychotic violent attacks. Might also explain why paramedics are being attacked while they try to assist people who are suffering from its effects. Ian says, check its history. It equates with poisoning and murder to put that in the mix. The makers and dealers should be charged with murder and attempted murder. Thanks for your point of view, Ian. Grayman has got in touch and he says they're terrorists, these people who put 19 people in hospital. If it were true, New Zealand would be turning itself inside out to do something about it. But because it's a consumer crime and it's drug users and it's people we don't really care about, it's a side story. What does this say about New Zealand? There's more coming up after 6. We're going to go back to Indonesia. We'll also have more from New Zealand football.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. New Zealand Football's president Derek Shaw says he doesn't plan to resign after a damning report into the organisation's culture. The independent review follows complaints by 12 Football Ferns players about former coach Andreas Haraf's bullying behaviour. There have been calls for Mr Shaw to resign, but he told Checkpoint he doesn't intend on doing so.
If the membership of New Zealand Football want us to step down, that's appropriate. But I think in the meantime, the feedback I've had from members of New Zealand Football is there's a job to do and we expect you to do it.
Derek Shaw says New Zealand Football accepts the report's findings and will implement its recommendations. A woman was sent to the cells this afternoon and charged with being in contempt of court after jurors said she approached them and told them of her views on a case. The woman has now been brought back up from the cells. She had been in the public gallery at the High Court in Auckland, where junior rugby coach and teacher aide Alosio Taimo is on trial.
Justice Moore said he'd received a note from the jurors saying the woman had approached some of them to say she believed what Mr Taimo was saying, and that meant the culprit is still out there. Mr Taimo faces 106 charges of sexually abusing children and is giving evidence in his own defence. The woman is also reported to have said she realised she could get them and her into trouble by talking to them. Justice Moore said the woman's actions strike at the heart of the justice system and what she had done was stupid and irresponsible. He encouraged them to put the comments out of their mind and concentrate on the evidence. I Tāmaki Makoto, ko Edward Gaiaho.
Tenants at a notorious boarding house in Auckland could end up sleeping on the streets as it shuts its doors for good. The former St Joseph's Catholic Convent on Great North Road in the Auckland suburb of Grey Lynn sold for $4.1 million in June to make way for tourist accommodation. The 30 or more tenants were supposed to have left yesterday, but many still remain. A tenant of 3 years, known as Fox, says the boarding house is his home.
This is me, this is my room, this is my things, this is my personality, this is my home. To be handed a piece of paper saying you've got 30 days to get out, you know, like plans. Don't make them. Just live, let the wind blow you where you want to go.
Fox, a boarding house tenant. Social services are helping tenants find alternative housing. The family of a teenager who died after being hit by a train in Auckland say safety measures at railway crossings have never been more important. The Transport Minister Phil Twyford and the city's Mayor Phil Goff have announced a $7.6 million plan to install more safety gates at level crossings. Karamia Mathis, whose son Keenan died at a West Auckland crossing last year, says the plan helps ease the grief. She says no other family should feel the pain of losing a loved one in a railway crossing accident.
A lot of people say that we're brave in what we're doing, but it's when we look around and we see young children walking out and using these pedestrian level crossings, and we see new housing developments around here, around our travel networks, that we need to keep going.
Karamia Mathis says Keenan would have welcomed today's announcement. The government needs to offer teachers bigger pay rises and better working conditions if it wants to avert strikes in primary and secondary schools. Teachers say they want to see a range of improvements to the offers they've rejected. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Members of the primary and secondary teacher unions have rejected offers that would have given most teachers a pay rise of 3% a year for 3 years. Teachers have told RNZ News that's not enough. But they say it's not just about pay. They want smaller class sizes, more help with children with special needs and lower workloads so they can concentrate on doing the best job for each child in their classroom. If they don't get a better offer, primary teachers will vote later this month on strike action, while secondary teachers will vote in November on possible industrial action. Call John Gerritsen in TNA.
An Otago University researcher says schools will have to do more to help the growing number of girls getting their period younger. New research shows girls as young as 8 are now menstruating. Data from the government's 2014-2015 New Zealand Health Survey reveals that 1 in 16 girls get their period while at primary school. Public health researcher Sarah Donovan has told Checkpoint more attention has to be paid to the impact of period pain on young girls.
Which is the main reason that girls and women miss school and work in any country in the world that's ever been surveyed about it. So obviously young girls in this age are going to really need the schools to be clued up about issues like that.
Dr Sarah Donovan says poverty and the inability to pay for sanitary products is also having serious social consequences. It's 6:05. The All Blacks midfielder Ryan Crotty says the Springboks have changed their defensive style to more of a British and Irish Lions type rush defence, and that played a part in their recent loss to South Africa in Wellington. However, he says the All Blacks have learnt from the defeats and have adjusted their game plan to combat the Boks' flat defence in this weekend's clash in Pretoria.
They've definitely changed their defensive system. They are bringing a little more line speed and they are numbering off a little bit differently than they have in the past. So we took some learnings out of that into the Argentinian game and it's about just continuing to take those learnings forward into this week's test match.
Midfielder Ryan Crotty. The veteran hooker Isaac Luke has confirmed he will stay with the Warriors Rugby League side next year, despite speculation he might leave because the Warriors were only able to offer him a reduced contract. Luke has announced he has re-signed with the Auckland NRL club on a 1-year deal. And the White Ferns coach, Heidi Tiffin, concedes losing their T20 series to Australia has been tough, but she believes it will put her side in good stead for November's World T20 tournament in the West Indies. The New Zealanders trailed 2-0 in their 3-match series in Australia with the final dead rubber on Friday in Canberra. Tiffin says finding out their weaknesses now will make them a better contender at the World T20.
We're certainly disappointed that we haven't got the results or beaten Australia, but we're hungry to get better and we're hungry to challenge ourselves and we are learning lots, and I'm pleased that we've got the opportunity to learn that now before the World T20.
Heidi Tiffin, and that's the news.
Fear. It's using misinformation and lies to try and convince people that vaccines are unsafe when they are perfectly safe. Fairness.
We can't have our teachers waiting any longer to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
And feral pests.
Certainly one weasel can do some damage. We're hoping to get on top of it as fast as possible to minimise that damage.
Free and fair. Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, how to achieve just transition for workers to green jobs in a low-carbon economy. And after 10, award-winning British historian and novelist Simon Sebag Montefiore on his epic works. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now looking at the weather forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. For Northland, mostly fine for the rest of the day, but scattered rain tomorrow, possibly heavy in the north and east. Auckland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty in the central high country, also Gisborne to Wairarapa. Fine with isolated showers, mainly about the ranges, some possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon north of Taihape. Wellington and Horowhenua Kapiti Coast, cloudy with patchy drizzle about Kapiti Coast tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, mainly fine with scattered rain developing in southern Canterbury late tomorrow. For Buller, mostly fine, however a few showers developing in the morning. Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Rain with heavy falls developing in Fiordland and Westland tomorrow. Otago and Southern fine, but a period of rain tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine. RNZ National, it is 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Alex Perrottet.
Thanks very much, Anna. Calls are coming for the President and Board of New Zealand Football to resign. This is after a damning report into the governing body's conduct and culture was released today. The independent review was headed by lawyer Philippa Muir, and it found that former Football Ferns head coach Andreas Heraf breached guidelines on bullying and harassment. The report also slammed New Zealand football for ignoring player complaints and failing to act. Our sports reporter Clay Wilson was at today's press conference when all these things were talked about, and joins us now in the studio. Thanks for joining us, Clay.
No worries.
It's not a pretty picture that's been painted here, and it's not just about Andreas Heraf, is it?
No, absolutely not. It's hard to imagine these findings could have been more damning of Heraf, but also the NZF board, the executive committee. While Philippa Muir said some of Heraf's coaching could be characterised as robust, she did go on to list a number of things. She said he breached the NZF Code of Conduct, the Human Resources Policy on Harassment, and WorkSafe NZ bullying guidelines. She said he failed to respect the rights, dignity and worth of some of the players, and perhaps most damning, she said he offended, humiliated and intimidated some of the players during his time in charge. But Philippa Muir also said that Heraf's not totally to blame. She said NZF definitely has shared responsibility in this. She said they didn't investigate concerns that were raised after the Spain tour and actually after the Thailand tour late last year. Derek Shaw, you spoke to him earlier, he says that they didn't know about those concerns, but she says they were perhaps ignored or put to the side somewhat. She also said that they didn't sufficiently support Heraf when he came into the role, specifically when he took over the Football Ferns role, obviously was in the technical director role and then took over the Football Ferns and wasn't really given the support to really go into that role and do a good job of it.
Right, yes, we heard complaints before about the New Zealand football's recruitment process and that Andreas Heraf had not had any experience at that level and with the women's group. I did speak to Derek Shaw before, and he seemed to be passing the buck to his management, particularly around the recruitment issues, but also, as you said, the lack of responding to the complaints when they were raised. What did you make of his defence tonight?
Yeah, a lot of his comments seemed very pre-prepared. He wasn't really willing to go out on a limb too much with some of his statements. I mean, they've definitely apologised for this, and he said they want to meet with the players and apologise to them face to face. But I don't know, that they said they've accepted the report, they're going to adopt all the recommendations, but whether Shaw or any of his board cohorts I guess stand to lose their positions over this, they've obviously overseen a lot of what's going on here. It's a very damning report. Whether they survive this process, I guess, remains to be seen, but it seems hard that at least one or two of them aren't going to fall by the wayside here.
Yeah, and look, there's 22 recommendations, there's a lot in there. What do you see as the salient points? What needs to be attacked first?
Yeah, well, 22 is a lot, so there's a lot to get through. I guess I can run through the main points. The first one was to apologise. They've obviously done that to get some feedback from the players and also offer them counselling if they want it as a result of what's happened. They said the recruitment process within New Zealand football needs to be much better. There basically doesn't exist. Heraf got the job as the Football Ferns coach without any recruitment process. No one else was looked at or considered for the role. Set up a welfare committee, high performance committee, player complaints process, which doesn't exist for the elite teams. But also there was a big focus placed on the emphasis on diversity and including more female female staff at New Zealand football. Just 21% currently of employees at New Zealand football are female, and none of those are in senior management. So there's a perception, Muir said, and this was quite damning, she said the organisation was something of a boys' club. I know you touched on that with Derek Shaw, and he was pretty non-committal about that. So I guess, and also they're saying, in terms of a focus on female coaches, that needs to be developed a lot more. A lot of the Football Ferns coaches in recent decades, have been male. So I guess mid to long term, getting a female in that role alleviates some of the potential problems that can arise in this situation.
Great, yeah, and Sam Malcolmson, of course, also referred to that, saying that a lot of the people, former players and people around the team, should really be called on to get more involved in there. So interesting that you're saying the same thing. Thank you for the update. Clay Wilson there on the latest with New Zealand football and their response to that damning report that came out today. Interesting to note that Derek Shaw did leave the door open to some resignations. He said if New Zealand football thought it was a good thing to do, he did concede that, so we may have more on that in the coming days. It's 13 minutes past 6. More than $7.5 million is to be spent improving safety measures at level crossings right across Auckland. Now, the funding boost is being welcomed by the family of a teenager who was killed by a train. They say safety gates at railway crossings in the city have never been more important. Our reporter Jessie Chang was at the Glen Eden train station for this morning's announcement.
The red lights at the pedestrian crossing at Glen Eden train station flash as warning bells ring through the air. The automatic gate shuts and closes off the path to the other side. The lights, gates and bells are all in place to keep pedestrians safe as the train pulls into the station. The safety measures are comfort for the Mathis family, who say they don't want anyone else to feel the pain of losing a loved one to a railway crossing accident. 16-year-old Keenan died last year, and his mother Karamea says with Auckland's growing population, safety has never been more important.
A lot of people say that we're brave in what we're doing, but it's when we look around and we see young children walking out and using these pedestrian level crossings, and we see new housing developments around here, around our travel networks, that we need to keep going.
Karamea Mathis says Keenan would have welcomed today's announcement.
We miss him so much. It's never a day, a minute of any day that we don't think of him. And I know he's here with us right now. He's got his arms around us and he's helping pedestrians keep safe at railway crossings.
Auckland Transport and the Transport Agency are putting the money towards installing new automatic gates and hazard lights at 11 crossings across the city. Phil Twyford says they do the job of keeping people safe.
I'm told by the officials that here at Glen Eden there have been, since I think January when the safety gate was installed, no near misses. This was one of the most dangerous spots in the network until the gates were put in place. So we know they make a difference.
Phil Goff says 7 people have died on Auckland railway crossings in the past 3 years, with 50 near misses in the last 12 months.
When a train hits a car or a pedestrian, it's unforgiving. You're 13 times more likely to be killed in an accident involving a train than in any other car crash.
Mr Goff says safety measures are urgently needed.
We're seeing more and more trains on our lines, and that's a good thing. 20 million passenger trips a year. They are electric, they're clean and they're quiet, but people don't hear them. And more people listening to electronic devices on their cell phones don't notice.
Mr Twyford says over the next 5 years, all 51 railway crossings in Auckland will have either safety gates or grade separation installed or be closed off completely to pedestrians. The safety upgrades will be rolled out at West Auckland, Avondale and South Auckland first. I Tamaki Makoto, o te hōtaka o te ahi nei, kōrisi chang tēnei.
And you can watch Jessie's report. There's video and footage there that you hold your breath at, because there's near misses that have been caught on the CCTV footage. Very interesting to watch, and for goodness sake, if you are walking across train lines, take the headphones off or the earbuds out and do look both ways. As some of us were saying earlier on, we repeatedly do. It's amazing how some people can be careless there, so do take care. Good to hear that the government is putting money into making those crossings more safe. Just coming up to 17 minutes past 6, time is running out for anyone trapped in the rubble of a devastating earthquake and tsunami in Indonesia, as increasingly angry survivors wait for an aid operation to move into high gear. Officials say the death toll is now past 1,300. But search teams continue their work amid aftershocks. Foreign aid has started to arrive now in Palu, where most of the confirmed dead have come from. Now, the ABC's David Lipsome is in Palu finally after a 15-hour car ride. He told me the chances of finding survivors are diminishing.
Hopes have now all but faded for finding more survivors. I mean, it's now Wednesday. The quake actually happened on Friday. So, look, it's not completely out of the question. They're going to continue searching. But there's a fairly strong smell of death throughout this whole city. It was the first thing that struck us as we came down out of the mountains after a 15-hour journey, which normally takes 4 hours. The first thing that struck us was that the smell of death, the smell of, well, I'd describe it as rotting ocean, piles of debris and well, just platforms where you imagine that whole villages used to be, or whole settlements used to be. And as we drove on, a large boat just perched in the middle of the road. So it's fairly dramatic scenes here. The way in, that journey, the reason it took 15 hours is that there are ongoing aftershocks, a very strong one this morning that I heard the building next to me where I was sleeping outside. The building next to me was cracking. But those aftershocks that are caused
Yeah, just popped out a little bit there. So you're saying the aftershocks are causing landslides. You've described the smell of death, and you're talking about the fact that maybe there is a little bit of hope to find some survivors, but that's fading. Now, amongst all of that, the people who have survived are still there and have to live amongst it all. What's the mood on the street there, particularly as people start to clamber for food? We've heard about looting. We've seen people who are in a desperate situation. What's the sense and the feeling there on the street today, David?
Look, I'd have to say that actually the overall sense is one of positivity and smiles, which is absolutely remarkable. Yes, there is a small element that have been taking advantage of a terrible situation, and there has been looting, and there have been scrambles for food. There was a fairly dramatic scene on the runway yesterday where a Hercules tried to take off to evacuate injured people, and others who wanted to evacuate refused to let it go. They sat in front of the plane. So yes, there is some desperation, but you know, last night as I sat around and had a quiet chat to a couple of people, everyone was you know somewhat shell shocked, but you know, as positive as you can be when you've lost everything you own.
Amazing that people there react in such a way, and I guess that gives a bit of hope to the people around them who they're trying to help. I guess find something to hold on to. A lot of these people have lost everything, haven't they? They've lost their homes. We've seen pictures of the earth as it's been described rising up and just engulfing their homes. What's the government saying it's going to do? Obviously, it's in a rush to get food and to get fuel and supplies and I guess makeshift shelters now into that place. But what's the government saying that it's going to do, I guess, in terms of looking after these people who are in such a desperate situation?
Yeah, it was a multi-pronged attack from the Indonesian government. They are now pretty well established here. You see military, police and rescue authorities. In fact, a big police truck just went past me then. You see their resources everywhere. They've set up camps and the like. Now that they're established, they're going to try to, as quickly as possible, do the same for the people here. They want to restore as much as possible some sense of a normal life for these people. Now, of course, that normal life is going to involve living under a tarpaulin and essentially eating noodles and water. But they do want to at least give people the stability of knowing that they're going to have food, knowing that they're going to have water, and knowing that they're going to have some sort of shelter over their heads. That is the priority now. From there, they will then move to start trying to move people into more semi-permanent structures, you would imagine. There won't be anything permanent for a long time. But also evacuating a lot of people. The first evacuations, I believe, several hundred people are going to be happening today, headed to East Java. So they are trying to get people just out of this region as well.
Wow.
Because it is just so badly damaged. You know, there's still no electricity in this whole region. They're hoping that they might get some back today, but the power stations were actually so badly damaged. It's not just a case of electricity wires being down; it's the power stations themselves that have been damaged. So, a lot of work to do here.
David Lipson with the very latest. He's reporting for the ABC in Palu, coming up to 23 minutes past 6. The government needs to come up with a better deal for teachers if it wants to avert a double whammy of strikes in primary and secondary schools at the end of the year. But what can it put on the table that teachers will accept? Their offer of 3 pay rises of 3% per year has been labelled as insulting by some, who say much more money is needed. But as our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports, others say it's not just about the pay.
Ask teachers what they want from the government's new deal and the answers are complicated. There's no one thing that would persuade them to accept the offer. Mangere primary school teacher Jordan Kaya has been teaching for just 8 months. He admits a bigger pay rise is one of the things he's hoping for.
Living in Auckland, I'm struggling to pay my rent. My next option will be to move out of Auckland. So in order for that to work, maybe a pay increase, or definitely a bigger pay job.
Another Auckland primary school teacher, Jessica Brown, says she wants an offer that reduces class sizes so she can give her students the attention they deserve.
just having the time to be with my students and to teach them, it's just missing from this offer entirely. All the testing that we have to do, the amount of students in my class, and then on top of that, I've got students with diverse learning needs, some with quite big behaviour challenges. I'm just not able to meet all of their needs. It's just horribly unfair right now.
Nick Gartell is a Southland secondary teacher. He says there's no single improvement that would make the government's deal acceptable.
I don't think you can say that a teacher would say, oh, 9-10% will get us over the line, we'd be happy. We want to bring pay up to parity with other professions that are a similar sort of wage. So I don't think a number per teacher is the answer. It is a combination of things. It is workload, it is acknowledgement that we do a good job.
Primary school teacher Jason Downs says the ministry has to improve its offer of 3% pay rises.
That basically equates to an extra $40 a week. And when we look at the likes of the cost of petrol going up and all those kinds of things, there's just no balance. So we are looking for a 16%. Most of us would sort of look at minimum of 8 to 10% to alleviate some of the pressures that are on teachers and on the profession.
Northland secondary teacher Esther Van Dyke says she wants an offer that will attract new people to teaching and make it easier to staff rural schools.
They need to come to the table with an offer that's reasonable in terms of salary. That is not the most important thing, though. What I'm finding, just in comparing teaching in two countries, is the workload is extraordinary. And it's difficult for me to focus on my teaching when I've got an enormous amount of responsibility outside of the classroom that really has very little impact on the classroom.
Secondary teacher Tina Mahairi-Rees from Wellington says Māori teachers need more recognition of the time they spend supporting Māori students.
I would like to see a little bit more non-contact time for our Māori teachers, either that or the community liaison role, taking on some of the roles that our Māori teachers take on outside of the classroom. Doing that would lighten the workload substantially for our Māori teachers so that they can concentrate on what goes on in their classroom.
The government has less than 2 weeks to improve its offer before primary teachers vote on holding a week of one-day rolling strikes, while secondary teachers will vote on industrial action on the 7th of November. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It's 6:26 before we leave you tonight. An 18-year-old high school student is looking to become the first female to win a medal in boxing for New Zealand at the Youth Olympics. Temania Shelford is among 61 athletes who will fly out to Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, this week to compete at the Games. Sports reporter Ravinda Hunia caught up with the young athlete at her boxing gym in Hamilton.
Before and after school, you can find Temania Shelford training at Nabby's boxing gym inside that upper race course.
Walk through that jab, turn out then, good girl. Walk through her jab, good timing.
I couldn't last for 5 minutes, but yeah, I'd been like skipping, and he told me to do some padding as well. But now I can last for the whole training, 2 hours. So I got to train like twice a day now, even in the weekends, and the healthy eating too. So I got to maintain my weight. But once I get it over and done with, all the hard work is paying off.
Shelford has had 21 fights in the under 57 kg division. She won silver at the 2018 Oceania Boxing Championships in Samoa that qualified her for Buenos Aires. Originally choosing to play netball, Shelford soon found the sport of boxing was in her blood.
My uncle Angus Shelford, she used to box for Olympics in 2000. In Sydney. He inspired me he had a broken wrist, but he still finished the fight, which is pretty inspiring. But yeah, I haven't met him yet. My papa, he talked a lot about him to me.
A distant cousin is former All Black captain Buck Shelford, and Nabby's gym owner Dion McNabney could see her potential from the moment he saw her at 14.
Her strength is her determination and strength. She's physically strong for her weight, just keeps coming forward, relentless. Yeah, and she has good ring strategy too. She's had some good prep at the Australian Golden Gloves. That is the pinnacle, the Youth Olympics, and she's lucky there's only 2 boxers going.
Commonwealth Games gold medalist David Nika never qualified to compete at the Youth Olympics due to age, but is impressed with Shelford's achievements. His father is a trainer at Shelford's gym.
For her to be qualified for the Youth Olympics is unreal. You know, I struggled through my youth just with broken hands. I was actually getting an x-ray today on one of my hands that I broke back in 2012, which is when I was a youth boxer. So they are really tough times for youth athletes. You know, you've got all these distractions. You want to go hang out with your friends and do stupid stuff. But I guess it's a huge stepping stone to be on that platform.
And in her final year at Melville High School, Shelford has been confronted with those challenges. Shelford turned 18 years old during preparations, and she's yet to celebrate.
And just think about school and training. I keep saying no. My friend wanting to buy me like food, and I can't really eat food, just healthy food. Well, I haven't had a cake yet, so Mum says she'll like make me a cake when I come back from Argentina.
What's the shoulder roll, Marnie?
Shelford leaves for Buenos Aires on Thursday in what will be the team's 4th international tournament this year. A gold medal would trump the only other New Zealand boxer at the Youth Olympics, Joseph Parker, who won silver in 2010. Mo te hōtaka o te pō nei, ko Ravinda Hunia aho.
Feedback still coming in about cannabis, well, synthetic drugs too. Some people saying don't call it cannabis, and that's why we've been calling it synthetic drugs. Police, obviously, in that report by Logan Church, saying it's far more dangerous and, as we've seen, deadly as well. That's all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for tuning in. Catch up on everything online, rnz.co.nz. We'll see you tomorrow. Ka kite a pōpō.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. New Zealand Football's president says the organisation accepts and will act on a report that's strongly critical of its culture. A woman has been charged with contempt of court in Auckland this afternoon after jurors said she told them her views on the Alosio Taumo case. Tenants of a boarding house in the Auckland suburb of Grey Lynn could end up on the streets. Now it's closed its doors for good. And teachers say the government needs to offer bigger pay rises and better working conditions if it wants to avert strikes next month. Our next news and weather at 7.
The APRA Silver Scrolls celebrate New Zealand's finest songwriters.
Congratulations, you made it.
Past winners include Beck Runga, Don McGlashan, Sharon O'Neill and Chris Knox. I'm Karen Hay, and I'll be hosting a live Silver Scrolls special tomorrow night along with Alex